Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 9th of January 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish.
Well, we're going to get straight on with Brexit, Brian, and lots going on in the House of Commons yesterday evening. As you can see, not very much going on at all there. But anyway, yesterday evening it was busy. 20 Tories voted against the government for an amendment to block taxation powers unless no deal Brexit is taken off the table. So 303 votes to 296 is how that went. And on top of that, John Bercow allowed what was just being described as an out-of-order amendment from, I believe, the same Tory Remainer, so-called rebels, as many people are calling them. And he's said to have not listened to the advice of clerks when he permitted this vote. So the vote's going to take place, well, I believe it's taking place right at this moment, or at least there's a discussion about the amendment taking place right at this moment and followed by a vote. This was a particular type of motion that they have brought an amendment into, and the government believed that this process of bringing this amendment wasn't possible, but anyway, it's gone ahead anyway, so we'll see what happens with that, but not going too well for Theresa May nonetheless. Everybody's expecting her to lose the meaningful vote next Tuesday. So this was what some of the MPs were saying about this. Brexit is about taking back control to our sovereign parliament. This amendment simply puts that into practice and means that no deal requires a vote in parliament. The government should accept it happily. Now, what they're effectively doing is saying with this amendment that if Theresa May loses the vote next Tuesday, she's going to have to come back to Parliament with a plan B within 3 days because a no deal is unacceptable to them. So anyway, but this was George Freeman was saying that on Twitter, and he also said this on Twitter: Parliament is sovereign, Brian. The government governs only with the consent of MPs in Parliament. Tonight, we took back a little bit of control, so that was the vote last night. Now, I just wanted to sort of correct George Freeman on this. No, the people are sovereign, not Parliament. And in fact, the government is only held to account by Parliament with the consent of the people. And it is the MPs are there to represent that consent. They're not there to be the sole owners of that consent. And so there seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding within Parliament about the constitutional arrangements, and neither side on this, the government, which seems to be just riding roughshod over the Constitution, nor Parliament, which is apparently attempting to stand up for its rights at the moment, seems to really understand what the Constitution is or what it represents.
And I think that's deliberate, Mike. Before Christmas, we were getting information about angst within Westminster. One of the documents that was brought to our attention was the Cabinet Office handbook. And at the beginning of that handbook, we will be able to show some of this material in the coming days. But in that opening, its description of the constitutional situation was wrong. But this is the type of material that is now briefing MPs. So MPs don't understand the Constitution. They're not being briefed properly on what the Constitution is. This, of course, is deliberate because power has been taken away from the MPs largely by the back room boys in the Cabinet Office. And at the moment, Mike, we still can't say how many people work in that office.
No, it's very, very difficult. I mean, the government does publish now an organogram, if that's the correct word for it, which shows some of the sort of key positions within the Cabinet Office, but it's very difficult to actually understand how many people work for each of those teams and what their jobs actually are. But you're absolutely right. Ministers and Secretaries of State no longer set policy. They simply implement what they're told to implement, it seems. That seems to be a change in the form of governance that we've seen in the last 30 years since Tony Blair. But in the meantime, Brian, many people will have seen this report from the BBC about Anna Soubry and the people that have apparently confronted her and called her a Nazi on live TV on the BBC. I found this particular BBC clip very, very interesting because anytime I've been to the Green outside Parliament, the BBC has carries out its interviews, as you can see there, on top of a big stage, which is well above head height. And it's not often you see that they have other cameramen scattered around the grounds to take the other shots, as we have in this case. So were the BBC tipped off about this protest? I'm not sure. But anyway, it's being taken full advantage of. We've got James Goddard there, who of course is one of Tommy Robinson's colleagues. And of course,
well, do we know?
No, we know for certain that that's who it is. Yes,
right,
and he is one of Tommy Robinson's colleagues, and of course, this is therefore being presented in the mainstream press as being some kind of right-wing extreme event which took place, well, that was followed up then with Nick Bowles MP, who apparently received a death threat. Now here is the tweet that he put out. Received this charming message through my website last night. If the inadequate who sent anything new about me would realise I need no reminding that my days are numbered. Well, on the right-hand side there we have a report. Grantham MP receives death threat from the Grantham Journal. This is Nick Bowles' local newspaper. And there was a pretty spectacular quote from that report, because it said, the threat, apparently from a Russian email address, but sent from the UK, said, your days are effing numbered, traitor, prepare to die. So it is a pretty unpleasant message, but the standard of journalism here is an absolute disgrace, because when we look at what Nick Bowles pushed out and we look at the so-called Russian address, the Russian email address is putin@fsb.ru. So anybody with any ounce of common sense will realise that that is a fake address. But even if it weren't, even if it were a more significant address like that, clearly this journalist has done made no effort to actually establish whether it's a genuine email address or not. And most people who are filling in forms on the Conservative Party website, I would imagine, are not necessarily using their own personal information or giving the Conservatives their own personal information. So particularly not in this case, but it clearly was not a Russian email address. So we're not only trying to link right-wing extremism with Brexit, but we're now attempting to link Russian trolls with Brexit as well.
And we've got to say, Mike, we can't even be sure that this is an article written by a local journalist, because across the country we've got these so-called BBC democracy journalists embedded in most of the local newspapers. So,
well, what we can say is that he's got a local publisher email address, but you're absolutely right. Who is he actually being funded by? Is he paid by the local newspaper, or is he being paid through this BBC scheme? We don't know. Because
we know they collaborate in the stories, because the BBC is busy boasting of how successful it is in working with local journalists to decide which are the hot stories. So we're now really living in the world of you cannot trust media in the United Kingdom. Why? What is the agenda at the moment? They are driving very hard, Mike, to basically pin that if you are against the European Union, you want to leave, then you are a vile right-wing extremist. And significant, I think, that the gentleman in that video clip that you showed was also wearing a yellow jacket. So we've now, it appears, got a crude attempt to brand anybody who stood up for the yellow jacket movement in France as being a vicious right-wing extremist, whereas of course the facts are that those protests across France have involved hundreds of thousands of people who've done their protests very peacefully. Interesting to watch it happen. Well, let's come on to the subject of Britain's armed forces, and of course before Christmas we had this headline rocketing out everywhere, which was that the concerns over a no-deal Brexit was so great with the government that they'd put 3,500 troops on standby. When questioned in Westminster as to what was really going to happen here, Gavin Williamson didn't really say much. He only said that they'd put the armed forces on standby to deal with, quote, any disruption. They're reserving ferry space for supplies. That's very interesting. I wonder what desperate supplies are going to be brought over in the event of Brexit that goes wrong. Number 10 confirmed on Tuesday that ministers would ramp up no-deal planning and that departments would be expected to make it their main priority, but they couldn't say in Westminster what departments had got any need for troops. But have we got any troops? Well, we know that overseas we've got more servicemen being seriously hurt. This was a report a few days ago. 2 special forces soldiers were hurt by a so-called intelligent ISIS missile. So this was in Zaire al-Zur. And apparently these 2 British servicemen were working with the Syrian Democratic Forces. But the Ministry of Defence, as usual, uses the excuse that because they're special forces, the government is not going to tell the British public what these 2 men were doing, who they were working with, and what their job was. Well, key part of their job is very easy. They would have been training other people to fight and kill. But of course, we don't know which side the British government was playing on in this case. So we'll just emphasise that while we've got some really extraordinary things going on with the armed forces in UK, overseas the public is not entitled to know where British forces are fighting, dying, being injured. So here we've got the situation at home, and this is really quite an extraordinary article. There are several papers covering it, but it's around an army recruiting campaign which used this headline: "Snowflakes, your army needs you and your compassion." And the soldier who suddenly discovered that his face had been used in this was extremely upset. So Stephen McWhirter, 28, spoke out on Facebook after the controversial new army recruitment posters were unveiled. He said he had no idea his image would be used in the drive targeting Generation Z. And it stated that snowflakes, the army needs you and your compassion. So this is a very, very expensive campaign. It's, I think, a deep psychological campaign because, of course, what that soldier realised very quickly was that he was being labelled as a snowflake. And if he, as a serving soldier, is labelled as a snowflake, effectively anybody who's in the British Army is being labelled as a snowflake. So there's reason for this. But the campaign actually went on. We had other posters with phone zombies. Your army needs you and your focus. So if I've got this right, Mike, amongst the younger generation, if you spend your whole time looking at your phone, the army needs your focus. Whereas I would have said the army doesn't need somebody like this because they're likely to be focused on their phone rather than the military task in hand.
Unless what they're intending for these people is the focus that they put into their phones perhaps goes into drone strikes or remotely or cyber or something along these lines.
Well, it could be. We need to get deeper in. Here's another one: selfie addicts. Your army needs you and your confidence. Now, most people would say that if you spend your life taking selfies, you've got extreme narcissistic tendencies. This isn't a particularly good thing to have operating in the military. Now, we'll tell the audience, Mike, that you're having a smile here, and we can understand that. But actually what's going on is very dangerous. Here is a proper snowflake, the Minister for War, Gavin Williamson. And he said the campaign is a powerful call to action that appeals to those seeking to make a difference as part of an innovative and inclusive team. And I'm going to encourage our audience today to remember those words as we delve into this recruiting initiative in a little more detail. Don't forget, if you want to learn more about Gavin Williamson, have a look at his Twitter page. He had a Christmas message recorded for British servicemen and women. Appalling, worth watching. It is so bad, so grovelling, so insincere. I think actually he puts Theresa May to shame on this one. But he goes on to say that the snowflake recruiting initiative shows that time spent in the army equips people with skills for life and provides comradeship, adventure and opportunity like no other job does. Now all jobs in the army are open to men and women. The best just got better. Now, other MPs have picked up on this, and James cleverly, or maybe not so clever, the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, he said that people criticising the British Army's new snowflake recruitment campaign are missing the point. The Army has always recruited from the society it serves, and often from those who some describe as not up to the mark. It then turns those recruits into world-class soldiers. This is pretty cynical stuff, Mike. And this man is missing the point completely, because as the soldier has pointed out, the campaign is demeaning people in the British Army, so you're likely to get even less recruits, which is precisely what's happening. And Forces Network, with its associated TV station, has actually picked up on this subject. And the image there on screen is not from Forces Network itself. This has actually been put out by Capita as part of their army recruitment campaign, and the title of this image is "This is Belonging." Now, I don't, excuse me, I don't know what you think of this one, Mike. I know you haven't seen it until now, but there's something very sinister about this image, in my opinion. And of course, what it's really doing is pushing women to the fore. So these faceless women are now the leaders within the military. And the cartoon, it's all a bit of a joke anyway. Well, people are getting their legs and arms blown off, or they're being killed. But Capita says that this is belonging. They defended the fact that at the moment their particular recruitment campaign is falling apart by trying to say we're actively working in partnership with the Army to support the MOD's plans for recruitment. Applications to join the British Army remain strong, and interest in joining the Army is growing due to ongoing campaigns, including This is Belonging campaign. Now that statement is absolutely untrue, because if we go to comment that's actually been made in some of the Westminster committee rooms, this gentleman, Tory MP Mark Francois, was particularly hard-hitting in pointing out that Capita is failing across the board in its recruitment. So he went on to say this: they are known affectionately across the Army as Crapita. And he says when the Army attack, instead of 8 men getting out of a vehicle, there are 4. He was being accurate in his statistics here. The Army is, quote, withering on the vine because it's being starved of recruits, because these people haven't got a clue what they're doing. The Army is a basket case. This is affecting our ability to fight. So on one hand, we've got the government saying we're going to use 3,500 members of the armed forces to help with Brexit, but under the surface, we're seeing this dramatic campaign to dismantle the armed forces. If I just end the segment here, Mike, in reality, this is a deliberate planned attack to actually finish off Britain's armed forces. They're admitting that for the Army, Capita is only succeeded in recruiting 1 in 10 of the recruits needed. So this is a massive shortfall, and clearly it's not by accident.
Is compassion a normal trait for a military force?
You've got to say, in the first instance, Mike, it's not a trait that you want.
Yes, I understand that the military
because you want people who are going to fight, and you want people that when they are in the battle, they are going to go for the jugular. The compassion is something that comes next. But to say you're recruiting compassionate people, this is the world upside down. Is it accidental? Well, you've mentioned Mr. Bowles. Let's bring him back on screen, because this is what UK Column reported was being revealed in the press back in 2015. So Nicholas Bowles MP said in that period, The Guardian in particular, the Prime Minister and his deputy Nick Clegg want their, quote, people power revolution to unleash chaotic effects across local communities. Chaotic, therefore, in our Conservative vocabulary, is a good thing. And that statement was reinforced by the parliamentary candidate at the time, Danny Kruger. He had to resign as a result of what he revealed. And Kruger said the Conservatives plan to introduce a period of creative destruction in the public services. So I'd say, Mike, that the evidence is all there, that this chaos in public services within the armed forces, the NHS, teaching, this is not accidental, this is not due to incompetence, this is planned policy from deep within central government.
Now, over the last number of months, viewers and listeners have been very good about taking up our calls to ask their MPs about what's going on with the British military with respect to military unification in Europe. And we've had plenty of evidence now that in general, people are receiving simply template letters. But this one was sent to us a day or two ago. And it's from Minister of State for Defence, Earl Howe, Freddie Howe. And I just want to go through some of the key points on this and sort of explain them a little bit, because this letter is a little bit different to the ones that we've seen to date. So he's talking about PESCO, and this, of course, is Permanent Structured Cooperation, which is part of the EU military unification process. It's only one of the acronyms that's used with respect to EU military unification, but this is what he says in his letter. PESCO is intended to help EU member states develop the military capabilities they need to respond to the range of threats Europe faces. Now, Brian, I understood that countries develop the military capabilities that they need, but apparently this is being done at a European level, and this is being acknowledged by Earl Howe, and we'll understand shortly about why this statement is important. He goes on to say the UK has supported the launch of PESCO. However, the UK will not join PESCO as a participating member state. It is therefore important to us that PESCO remains open to non-EU states. So what he's saying there is that basically the UK intends to fully participate in PESCO, but not as a member, initially at least. He's not prepared to admit that we would ever be a member, but at this point we are. He does want Britain to participate, that is the policy. So it's important that PESCO remains open to non-EU member states. He goes on to say the UK has consistently said that PESCO must be designed in a way that strengthens the relationship with NATO and promotes an open and competitive European defence industry. Well, if we take that first point first, the UK column has consistently said that if you watch what NATO and the EU have been doing over the last several years, and particularly the very close relationship between Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and Federica Mogherini, the High Representative for the European Union, it is absolutely clear that NATO and the European Union and the European Commission are in lockstep, or perhaps goose step, with the idea of a unified EU military. As for the second part, European defence industry, an open and competitive European defence industry, yes, Britain wants to be part of that as a fully paid up member of the cartel, because that's what it's becoming. Correct?
Absolutely. And of course, they are also doing it by using the smokescreen of the agreements with France,
right,
as if France was an independent nation state.
Okay, the letter goes on then. Your constituent raised a specific concern regarding the wearing of EU insignia by UK personnel. All national troops deployed on these EU operations wear the EU signature, insignia, much in the same way troops of every nationality wear the UN light blue beret. So I went and had a look at UK troops deployed, or at least wearing UN berets when they're deployed, and here we are. We see some UK troops, well, indeed, they are wearing a UN badge on their arms. But you'll see that the Union flag is there as well. So
above it, significantly.
Yes, exactly. So it's clear where the command and control is. But anyway, that's the way it is with the EU troops. Let's compare and contrast that with UK troops being deployed to an EU exercise recently. We highlighted this. This was Bosnia. Well, you can see the EU insignia on the right arm and no UK insignia at all, no Union flag there. So I thought, well, perhaps it's on the other arm. So another part of the same video. We can see that there is no Union flag on there either. So this is not the same as the UK troops when they're deployed on UN peacekeeping missions, not at all. And so there's some questions still to be answered on that one. But let's get back to Freddie Howe's letter. He said, "I can assure your constituent that under no circumstances would the UK surrender control of our armed forces to anybody." Well, Lord Howe, we've got to then ask the question, what was the specific command and control structure when UK troops deployed to Bosnia on that EU exercise? I'd like to get to the bottom of that one. What is necessary is for national armed forces to work together effectively when they're called upon to act, he said. And it goes on to say, fundamental to our approach is for the EU's contribution to defence and security to be complementary to and respect the role of NATO, which is the cornerstone of our defence. Well, we've already covered that. He goes on to say, the government's position remains that we will not support measures that would undermine member states' competence for their own military forces or lead to competition or duplication with NATO. But Lord Howe knows very well that competence with respect to the UK's military forces has already been undermined through the Strategic Defence and Security Reviews and through what seems to be coordinated strategic defence and security reviews coordinated with other EU member states to make sure that not only is there not competition or duplication with NATO, but there's also no competition or duplication with other EU member states. And that's the key point. So he knows that Britain's competence for our own military forces has already been undermined. If you want a bit more on what that's about, we need to look at the other acronym, one of the other acronyms with regard to military unification, that is CARD. And we have an article on the UK column website entitled Brexit, Theresa May's Cards on the Table. Of course, CARD is all about coordinated defence reviews. So it stands for Coordinated Annual Review on Defence. And what we say in this article is PESCO is closely connected to the new Coordinated Annual Review on Defence, as well as the European Defence Fund, which is currently being developed under the European Defence Industrial Development Programme. CARD was announced at the end of 2016. It's designed to meet the objectives of the EU Global Strategy, which called for the gradual synchronisation and mutual adaptation of national defence planning cycles and capability development practices. I'm sorry, Lord Howe, but how is it possible to maintain autonomy over your own military and avoid reduction of competence whenever you're doing things in this way? It isn't possible, is it?
It isn't possible, Mike. But the wording, of course, itself tells us competence. If you follow it back, this was a word that came out of the European Union. Competence in the English language was never used in the way that it's now being used in political documents, and particularly EU documents. So you can tell in the language. But he's talking about national armed forces working together. Well, of course they're not, because those other nation states are already subsumed into the European Union, and the European Union has declared it is creating fully integrated, unified armed forces. So is this, if we're nice to the dear Lord Freddie, is this another case where actually he hasn't got the correct information in front of him? He goes by the government's own briefing sheets, which are of course a lie or a lie by omission, and he's pumping out what he genuinely believes to be true? Or is he complicit in peddling the lie to the British public?
I believe it's the latter, because of course he's second in command to Gavin Williamson, so he's supposed to.
He should know
what the policy is. But let's just remind ourselves what Theresa May has said on this. The UK would like to. This is talking about the future relationship with the EU post Brexit. She said the UK would like to offer a future relationship that is deeper than any current third country relationship. The future partnership should be unprecedented in its breadth, taking in cooperation on foreign policy, defence and security, and in the degree of engagement that we envisage. And at Christmas, or just before Christmas, when she was in such trouble, she had said that she wanted a Brexit that delivers on the vote that people gave, that brings back control of our money, our borders and our laws, and protects jobs, security and the union. And the point that we're making is that this is a piece of Aesopian language. Protects jobs, security. This is European defence and security, and the Union. Well, we don't believe that she's talking about the United Kingdom, because as far as I know, the United Kingdom is not at risk as a union as a result of Brexit at this point. Perhaps at some point in the future there may be another Scottish referendum on independence, but it looks to me like the union she's talking about is the European Union. I think Lord Howe has quite a few questions to answer, particularly with respect to the insignia, but also the competence issue. And I think if anybody wants to write some more letters and try to find out what the government's position on this is, then read that article on Card and perhaps ask a couple of questions on that subject, because we absolutely believe that the UK will be subsumed into that particular structure as well. Yeah.
Well, we've been droning on, I think, on this subject, so let's put the drones on the screen. I just found it fascinating to watch the pantomime and comedy that took place over the so-called drone at Gatwick, and then, of course, it was followed by apparently another drone sighting at Heathrow. I never did seem to get to the bottom of what had actually occurred, whether there was a drone or not a drone. This is another story that droned on but didn't take us anywhere in particular. But very interesting to see Russia Today, and in fact other sources, picking up on the fact that as a result of all this so-called drone activity, that Rafael has been able to sell its drone dome system. So this was the report from Russia Today. One of the technologies deployed at Gatwick in December was the Israeli drone dome system, designed by Rafael to provide effective airspace defense against hostile drones, aiming to perform aerial attacks, collect intelligence and other intimidating activities. The company said there'd been renewed interest in the product since the Gatwick incident. That is an amazing situation, isn't it?
They couldn't have asked for better advertising.
Christmas present, really.
Absolutely.
Christmas present for Israel and Rafael, that a drone did or did not appear, but it's helped sales. So I think it's a little bit about create your own drone dome market. This was the Guardian report, and they get into it a little bit more because Heathrow and Gatwick have apparently invested millions now in anti-drone technology. So the report talks about Drone Dome. It says how good it is, says it can destroy the drones using a laser beam. The model reportedly procured by the UK military does not have such a capability. Well, that doesn't surprise me because it probably wasn't Snowflake equipped, Mike, just to drop that in. According to the Times, a spokesman for the systems manufacturer, Rafael, confirmed that there had been, quote, a significant interest in the product from various authorities in the UK and other nations, but declined to confirm whether Gatwick had bought one. So I have to use the slightly unpleasant expression, it's a dog breakfast as to what actually took place. Personally, I think we had a drone used, or reports of a drone released, in order to help a very lucrative sales deal, but maybe it wasn't the case.
Well, news over the last day or two, more Brexit news now, because £800 billion apparently has left London. What a shame, as a result of Brexit. This is according to Ernst & Young, and they're saying that banks, other financial organisations have shifted assets worth at least £800 billion from the UK to Europe thanks to Brexit. And that's about 10% of the total assets of the UK banking sector, apparently. A conservative estimate. Ernst & Young saying that their numbers only reflect the moves that have been publicly announced. We know that behind the scenes firms are continuing to plan for a no-deal scenario. So this is just more pressure building to try to avoid a no-deal scenario and perhaps bring on a second referendum. I think that's a very likely outcome at this point. But you know, at the end of the day, the financial system in no better health than it has been at any point in the last 20 or 30 years. Well, Canary Wharf experiencing 2 deaths in 2 days from a height. So the first one was yesterday. A city worker apparently was witnessed sending a text. He set down his bag, he sent a text on his phone, and then fell to his death from a height in Canary Wharf shopping centre. And 24 hours before that, somebody apparently fell from a height at Canary Wharf tube station. So people clearly feeling perhaps under pressure at the moment for some reason.
Well, what a poisonous environment to work in, Mike, at the end of the day. I think that city area must be truly unpleasant, particularly if you work in the banking sector. More on that in due course. Now, one of the things that's been happening for several weeks is UK Column has been getting a lot of material which shows that people are getting very unhappy with a number of things going on in the country. And the subject of immigration is always a very big one. This is part of an email that was sent to me. And what it is doing is comparing allowances for British old age pensioners and comparing it with the amounts of money that immigrants or refugees might get living in Britain. Now, I haven't checked the accuracy of the figures. My point on this is the fact that whoever sent this into the UK Column was clearly outraged by what they saw happening. And we know that a number of people are getting very uptight when they start to see imbalance between the nurturing of long-term residents of this country compared to immigrants. So the figures here clearly show, if they're correct, that if you're an illegal immigrant or a refugee living in Britain, you're going to get more money than somebody on the old age pension. And of course, this is very emotive stuff. Many people getting extremely angry about this type of unfairness. That's the word. Thank you, Mike. Another document here that was sent through to me is part of a government document which is talking about asylum support and what you'll get. So this is not just one person, this is creeping up more and more, people getting really quite angry. To which we say, what is going on here? This is not accidental, what's happening. And a reply I sent, which I'd like to share with our viewers today, is the reason that this has occurred is to stir up the very suspicion and unhappiness and anger that people express, divide and rule, so that people do not focus on the source of the problem, but turn on each other. Who made the immigration policy? Question mark. Who were they? Who are they? This is the key point. Who made the policy that is now causing this angst and all of the troubles in UK? These are the real questions to be asked, and the problem needs to be pinned back on these very people. That way we win support from everybody affected by the policy, whether it's nationals or immigrants. It's so important that we stay on target, and that target is who is creating the chaos and carnage in UK and elsewhere in the world. But I wanted to say that UK Column, we are listening to what people are sending in to us. It's clear that people are getting more and more distressed at the chaos and the imbalance within UK. We say, who created the policy? This is the thing to focus on. I've got another one here, which I found very interesting. This was an email sent through, and all it said is Daily Express, 6th of January 2019, columnist Nick Ferrari, and the quote is, every aspect of the British infrastructure is being deliberately, methodically dismantled by incompetence and debt. Nothing is accidental. Now, I've said there's a bit of cognitive dissonance in this statement, because if nothing is accidental, I don't think it's incompetence. We're dealing in something that's planned, but isn't it interesting that we've now got so-called mainstream journalists starting to say something's not right, and they can't really get a grip to what it is. Now, to end on a positive note, this was also sent in to me. I can't tell you which paper it's from, unfortunately, but basically it's a letter, and it says, given the very fact they have allowed, they are allowed to charge, it seems quite incredible that our universities have been told they are on the verge of a credit crunch as they have embarked on a record borrowing spree. Debts in the sector have risen over the past 12 months to an astonishing 10 billion. Incredibly, that's 3 times more than before the financial meltdown. And the killer statement is the last paragraph, which says, and we trust these buffoons to teach our young people about economics, maths and business management. And I was really quite encouraged by this one, Mike, because we are seeing now that people are looking deeper into it. And what a powerful comment that the very universities that say they're there to educate and inform our young people for their future lives can't even administer their own business. And I'll add to that we were told a little while ago that some members of staff in a university, I think it was in the Midlands, but they're supposedly experts on other countries. They're running courses, they're teaching young pre-grads about what is happening in particular areas, including the Middle East. But it's emerged that these professors have never actually been to the countries in question. I found that just quite astonishing, Mike. So if we're discovering these things, it's doing something and digging into it, writing those letters, challenging the MPs, which is going to make the difference. We'll end there before we drone on. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time on Friday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.